guys, I'm Calder from Calder Ceramics and welcome back to another Christmas themed video. In today's video I will be showing you how to make a snowman out of clay. I have tried to throw it in one piece, but it's actually quite difficult to make the different balls of the snowman look like different balls. So it's actually easiest to make them as different balls and then stack them on top of each other later on. So that's what I will be doing and I'll show you how I do this. I hope you like it. I start off with the biggest ball of the snowman, which will be placed at the bottom. So I'm using more clay than I will be using for the next two balls. I start off with centering the clay. I do this by coning it up and pushing it down. You can repeat this multiple times if necessary. And then, when the clay is fully centered, I start opening it up. I do this by pushing the middle finger of my right hand into the middle of the clay and push sidewards. Because it's going to be a ball, I make the bottom on the inside round. So the part in the middle is thinner than the clay on the outside. I will be trimming quite some clay off of the sides to make it more circular. Then I start pulling up the walls. I hold the sponge in my right hand and push towards my left hand while making an upwards movement. Because it will be a round shape, I make sure that the top of the cylinder does not become too wide. I do this by holding both of my hands around it and push the rim inwards. To save myself some trimming work and to use more of the clay while throwing, I press my thumb into the clay at the bottom. This will help to make the shape rounder. Then I use the sponge again to push this bit of extra clay to the top, and I pull it up multiple times. Before closing the form, I go over the inside with a sponge to get rid of any water or slip on the inside. Then I start closing the form. I slowly pull up the clay and push the rim inwards. I'm leaving a hole at the top. The ball is actually thrown upside down, so the rim of the ball will be the bottom on which the snowman will be standing. So it's important to make sure that this is straight. When the form is close enough, I push from the inside out to make the ball even rounder. Then I went over it with a wooden loamer to smooth out the form and get rid of any water or slip on the outside. And then I went over it with a sponge to smooth it out even more. The top of the piece sticked out a little bit too much, so I flattened it by pushing with my sponge. And then the first ball is finished and I start making the other two balls. They work the exact same way, but I'll show them briefly. The ball that I'm throwing here is the middle one, so it's a bit smaller than the previous one. It's easy to make it smaller by just taking a smaller piece of clay to begin with. I'm not closing this piece either. I leave a hole at the top so that the air has a way out. And then I start with the last ball. This is going to be the head of the snowman and is going to be quite small. It might be a bit hard to make the ball so small, especially if you have big hands. But I'm basically doing the same things as earlier, but I'm using my fingertips. If you can't get the ball as small as this, you could also decide to make a big ball and make the whole snowman bigger. When all of the balls have been thrown, I let them dry for a day, so that they become leather hard and are ready to be trimmed. To trim the balls, I'm using my give and grip. I start off with using a small trimming tool, and I make the bottom of the ball centered and get rid of the excess clay. I prefer to use a small trimming tool for this because you will have less friction with the clay. This makes it easier to hold your hands still. When the bottom is centered, I start using a bigger trimming tool. This makes the trimming go a bit quicker and it's easier to make the shape smooth and fluent. I keep going over the sides of the ball to make it more circular. And I keep the top of the ball a bit flat. This will make it easier to attach the other ball on top of it. And then when the trimming is done, I go over it with a wet sponge to smooth it out. And then I get rid of the slip by going over it with this trimming tool. And in the end I go over it with my finger to smooth it out even more. Then the first ball is finished. I trim the smaller balls in the same way. The smaller ball was too small for the little hands of the give and grip, but when you turn them around they go closer to the middle and the smaller ball just fitted. If your ball is too small, you could also hang your ball into the give and grip. I show and explain this in my previous video about making Christmas balls, so you might like to check this out. Before attaching the second ball on top of the first ball, I make a hole in the first ball. This hole will be attached at the same place as the hole from the middle ball. This way the air can go in and out of the middle ball as well. This is important because when the clay dries it shrinks and the air needs a way out, otherwise the piece might crack or break. I place the second ball on top of the first one to see where I need to attach it, and I mark the spot with my needle tool. I also make a hole in the second ball, because the third ball will later on be attached on top of this. Then I scratch the part where the two balls will be attached. I'm using this tool from Seam Tools. Then I apply some vinegar with a brush at the same spot, and then I scratch it again. The hole I made closed a little, so I made sure it stayed open by going over it with my needle tool. Then I press the middle ball on top of the other ball, and I make sure that it is in the middle. And then I smooth out the attached parts by going over it with the vinegar brush. After this I start attaching the head of the snowman. I first place it on top to see where it needs to be attached. Instead of marking this spot with my needle tool, I twisted the ball a little bit, so that it made some little scratches. This is the spot where it needs to be attached, so I scratch this part again with my seam tool. Applied some vinegar, and then I scratched it again, and pressed the head on top of it. And I made sure that it was in the middle. At the beginning you can still move it a little bit, but the vinegar dries rather quickly. And then the snowman itself is finished and it's time to decorate it. I start off with making a nose. It's my plan to make it look like a carrot because that's what people use for a real snowman. I grab a little piece of clay and I roll this on top of the table. I hold my hand tilted so that one side of the clay becomes thinner. I had a bit too much clay, so I cut off some clay and rolled some more. Then I cut off some more clay to make it shorter. And I smoothed out the edges where I cut it. Then I make some texture on the nose by rolling my needle tool over it. This makes little lines just like the texture of a carrot. I did this all over the piece. Here is a bit of a closer look to what it looks like. Then I grab my snowman very carefully and I take a look at where I want to attach the nose. I push it onto the head to mark where I need to scratch it. It's a bit hard to see, but when you do it yourself you can probably see it better. Then I scratch this part. I'm using my needle tool to do this because it's a very small spot. And then I apply some vinegar and scratch it again. And then I press the carrot onto the head. And I made sure that it was straight. I also smoothed out the edges a little bit by going over it with a brush. I also like to make some eyes. For this I take a little bit of clay and make this into a ball in between my hands. Then I cut this in half. This makes it easy to make them the exact same size. And then I make sure that they are round and I flatten them a little bit. Then I push them onto the head to see where I want to attach them. I'm marking the spot with my needle tool to be sure that they are in the right spot. And then I scratch both of the spots. I'm first only applying vinegar to one of the spots because this dries quite fast. Then I scratch it again and push the eye onto it. I apply some vinegar at the other spot, scratch it, and push the eye onto the head. And then I smooth out the edges by using the brush. I also like to make a scarf. You can of course decide yourself how you'd like to decorate your snowman, but I'm just giving you an example. I grab some clay and I start rolling this out. I do this on a wooden plank, because the clay attaches easily onto my painted table. And I will also be cutting the clay later on. I roll out the clay to one side because it will be a long scarf. When the clay is nice and thin and I have the length that I need, I start to cut out the scarf. I just make 2 straight lines and I also straighten the ends. I like to make some texture at the end of the scarf so that it looks like the little strings that scarves often have. I do this on both sides of the scarf. And I'm using a little knife to do this, but you could also use your needle tool. As you can see, the sides of the scarf are a bit sharp from cutting it, so I like to smooth this out. I do this by going over it with my finger and push in the sides a little. I do this on both sides of the scarf. Then I hang the scarf around the snowman. As you can see, I cross the scarf at the end, but I'm not attaching it with vinegar. Because the scarf is a bit more wet than the snowman itself, I wanted to prevent it from cracking and gave it some space to shrink. This means that the form of the scarf will change a bit, which you will be seeing later on in the video. If you want to be sure that the scarf stays where it is, you can scratch the parts where you'd like to attach it and apply some vinegar just like I attached the other parts. And then the snowman is finished and ready to dry for biscuit fire. I decided to decorate the snowman with underglazes. I'm using underglaze from Emico. I started with making lines all over the scarf. I'm using a small brush to do this with long hairs. The long hairs make it easy to make straight lines and can hold more glaze than a small brush with short hairs. When I'm done with the scarf, I apply an orange glaze onto the nose of the snowman to make it look like a carrot. I apply 2 coats. Otherwise you might see the lines from the brush after it has been fired. And then I apply a black underglaze onto the eyes of the snowman. I have decided to not glaze the snowman itself because the clay is white and I kinda like that it is not shiny. I did apply 2 coats of clear glaze onto the parts that I underglazed. This will make these parts shiny and make the colors pop out. I let the glaze dry before applying a second coat. And then the snowman is finished and ready to be glaze fired. This is what the snowman looks like after it has been fired. That was it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked it and you learned something new from it. If so, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so yet. And if you're going to make this snowman yourself and you're going to post it on Instagram, please tag me at Calder so I can see your work. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!